everyone. Welcome to day 2 of Speech Matters, Safeguarding Democracy. I'm Michelle Deutschman, the Executive Director of the UC National Center for Free Speech and Civic Engagement. If you were here yesterday, we're glad you're back for more dynamic discussions. If you're just joining us today, we're happy to have you. All of yesterday's phenomenal sessions were recorded and will be available soon on the center's website. Real-time captions are available today in the Zoom session. Click on the closed caption button and select Show Subtitles to view the captions. Throughout the course of the day, we want to hear from you. Please enter your questions into the Q&A feature. Yesterday, we identified societal challenges to democracy that exist largely outside of the university, but absolutely impact life within. Today, we are diving deep into the campus ecosystem, both at the college and K-12 levels, and emphasizing the contribution that individuals can make to scaffold democracy. Before we kick off our first panel, I have an exciting announcement. The center is launching a podcast, also called Speech Matters. Each episode will feature thought leaders tackling the most pressing issues impacting free expression and democracy on campus and in society at large. Our inaugural episode, which is available now, Cheap Speech and Its Toll on Our Democracy, features election guru and UCI professor Rick Hasson and is available now on our website and wherever you listen to podcasts. As you may know, the center's board is chaired by two phenomenal leaders and scholars. Dean Aaron Chemerinsky joined us yesterday. This morning, we have the extreme privilege of hearing from UCI Irvine Chancellor Howard Gilman. He became the 6th Chancellor of the University of California, Irvine in September 2014. He is an award-winning scholar and teacher with an expertise in the American Constitution and the Supreme Court, and he holds faculty appointments in the School of Law, the Department of Political Science, the Department of History, and the Department of Criminology, Law, and Society. He has been instrumental in the success of the center, and I am fortunate to have the opportunity to learn from him and consider him a mentor. Welcome, Chancellor.
Thank you, Michelle, and hello, everyone. It is an absolute honor to join Michelle in welcoming you to day 2 of the 2022 Speech Matters Conference, which quite appropriately focuses on the theme of safeguarding democracy. I want to thank Michelle for her amazing leadership of this important center, and also thank everyone who made this conference possible, from our participants to our wonderful staff. There are many reasons to be concerned about the future of democracy, not just because of insurrections and unprecedented failures to accept the results of fair elections, but more generally because of erosions of public support for basic democratic norms, both here and abroad. In December, Pew summarized the most recent set of public opinion data by stating that, quote, in countries across the globe, democratic norms and civil liberties have deteriorated. Increasing numbers of people say that, quote, a system in which a strong leader can make decisions without interference from parliament or the courts is a very or somewhat good way to govern. And across 16 advanced economies surveyed, a median of just 17% consider American democracy a good model for others to follow. These challenges implicate many institutions and practices, but were gathered because they also implicate colleges and universities. The importance of education and scholarly exploration for the preservation of democracy was widely discussed in the early American Republic. As Jefferson put it, I know of no safe depository of the ultimate powers of the society, but the people themselves. And if we think them not enlightened enough to exercise their control with a wholesome discretion, the remedy is not to take it from them, but to inform their discretion by education. And of course, the American Academy of Arts and Sciences was founded in 1780, quote, to cultivate every art and science which may tend to advance the interest, honor, dignity, and happiness of a free, independent, and virtuous people. And so it's hard to imagine how one might maintain democracy without considering the importance of education and exploration. Thus, it's fitting that our first session today is on democracy and the role of higher education. And to discuss this topic, we have two of the most important, accomplished, and impactful leaders in all of American higher education. President Michael V. Drake of the University of California and President Ronald J. Daniels from Johns Hopkins University. I'm going to ask them to turn on their video now while I more formally introduce them to you. In August 2020, Michael V. Drake, MD, became the 21st president of UC's world-renowned system of 10 campuses, 5 medical centers, 3 nationally affiliated labs, more than 280,000 students, and 230,000 faculty and staff. Dr. Drake previously served as president of The Ohio State University from 2014 to 2020. Prior to his 6 years at OSU, his entire academic career has been within the University of California, including as the system-wide vice president for health affairs from 2000 to 2005, and then as chancellor of UC Irvine for 9 incredible transformative years from 2005 to 2014. Dr. Drake received his AD from Stanford University and his residency, MD, and fellowship in ophthalmology from UC San Francisco. He subsequently spent more than 2 decades on the faculty of UCSF School of Medicine, including as the Stephen P. Shearing Professor of Ophthalmology. Dr. Drake has published numerous articles and co-authored 6 books. He's a member of the National Academy of Medicine and the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. He received the UCSF School of Medicine's Clinical Teaching Award, the Hogan Award for Laboratory Research, the Chancellor's Award for Public Service, the Martin Luther King Jr. Award for University Service, the UC Irvine Medal, and the University of California Presidential Medal in recognition of his exemplary service to the university. Dr. Drake is the former chair of the board of directors of the Association of American Universities and currently serves as a member of the board of directors for the Association of Public and Land-Grant Universities. He's also the chair of the board of governors of the National Collegiate Athletic Association, a member of the American Talent Initiative Steering Committee, and a member of the board of directors of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Ronald J. Daniels has served as the 14th president of Johns Hopkins since 2009. During his tenure, Dr. Daniels has focused on his leadership in several key areas, strengthening interdisciplinary collaboration in research and education, enhancing student access, deepening engagement with the city of Baltimore, and supporting economic and social innovation. A law and economics scholar, he has written extensively on the intersections of law, economic development, and public policy, and advocated for the vital role that institutions, especially institutions of higher education, play in promoting democratic values, including in the recently published book, What Universities Owe Democracy, a wonderful book that I recommend to all of you and that I'm sure will be a focal point of this conversation. Before coming to Johns Hopkins, he was provost and professor of law at the University of Pennsylvania and Dean and James M. Torrey Professor of Law of the Faculty of Law at the University of Toronto. He's a fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and the American Philosophical Society. In 2015, he received a Carnegie Corporation of New York Academic Leadership Award and was named a member of the Order of Canada in 2016. Daniels earned a BA and a JD from the University of Toronto and an LLM from Yale University. Presidents Drake and Daniels, take it away.
Good morning. Good morning. Good to see everyone. I appreciate very much the chance to be here. Ron, always nice to see you, and I look forward very much to having a discussion.
As I do, Michael, it's great to be here, and Howard, thanks for that very generous introduction and for the opportunity to participate in this important conference.
So why don't we dive right in, President Daniels? You published your book, What Universities Owe Democracy, just this past fall. What inspired you to write this book, and why now?
So, Michael, I guess it was a few things. One was obviously an appreciation of our current democratic moment and the sense of fragility of our democracy. And we see this, of course, in some of the statistics that Howard referred to earlier. But we know that that American democracy is deeply challenged right now and has been for some years, as measured by a number of different indicia in terms of the levels of distrust in institutions, or growing polarization between Democrats and Republicans in this country, the great geographic sort that we see in this country, again, where people are moving to live in enclaves, where they're just living with like, and so forth. And so we know that in terms of our domestic democracy, but we also can't help but lose sight of what's happening internationally in terms of the erosion of of countries that were formerly designated democracies or even fragile democracies and seeing them backslide into autocracy. So, that was sort of the backdrop in which we're all living in that, of course, sensitized me, as it has so many of us, to the fragility of our democracy. And for me, what started me going on this project was asking the question, what precisely was the university's role in this democratic project? And although typically people think about such institutions as courts or competitive political institutions, one can think about the role of an independent media, all of these institutions as being critical, nay, indispensable for the democratic project. What was striking to me was that there was less attention on the role that universities play in the democratic project. And in particular, the more I thought about it, the more compelling it seemed to me that, in fact, we are associated with institutions that actually are indispensable for democratic flourishing. And so it was in that context that it seemed to me important to write about how well we are doing in terms of requiting our responsibilities to democracy and the ways in which we, in fact, might step up our activities and our commitment.
I appreciate that. And I know that in our travels, yours, mine, and others around the world, as we've visited universities, we often see, when looking at the history of a country, the role that the university or universities had in developing different forms of government and helping to educate the citizenry in their responsibilities to leading themselves forward and governing themselves. And I appreciate that sort of visceral feeling that you get about the role of universities in developing societies as they move forward. One of the things I think is one of the great virtues of American higher education is its institutional diversity. And the book highlights many different institutions, but pays special attention to research universities. And so how do you view the role of research universities in democracy? And are universities living up to their potential vis-a-vis the democratic project overall?
So it's a great question, Michael. And, although I try to be ecumenical in thinking about all the different institutions that contribute to post-secondary education in the United States, and it is, as you say, an incredibly diverse and vibrant sector, my attention focuses most assiduously on the role of research universities. And, when you think about, again, the ways in which universities can contribute to democracy, my book focuses on the role that we play in social mobility, that we're these engines of opportunity when we do it well. The way in which we can educate citizens for their democratic responsibilities, the role that we play in checking fact and claims by those in power and to see whether they are truthful or not. And finally, the ways in which we can model pluralistic communities, where you take all the diversity that comes to our institutions, really try and forge connections, habits that demonstrate the possibility for democratic citizenship, even when we know there's a great diversity of perspectives, values, and goals that are represented within our communities and often not easily aligned with one another. So that's what our institutions do. I think when you disaggregate it down that way, it's clear that, for instance, our nation's community colleges, two-year colleges, play a really important role in the social mobility part of the story. It's clear that all of the institutions, whether research universities, liberal arts colleges, community colleges, and so forth, we could all be playing a role in democratic education. But I think it is, at least for me, as much as you see the commonalities across all of these institutions in the four categories I enumerated a moment ago, I think it really is on the issue of fact-checking, stewardship of knowledge, creation of knowledge, and in particular, thinking about how we ensure that research universities, which are really supposed to be places that are committed so fulsomely to the idea that there is such a thing as truth, and that facts and principles matter, that role, I think, is one that is uniquely ours. And it's here that I think we have a particular role to play in ensuring that our activities are being directed in a way that is commensurate with, aligned with that obligation. I'd be interested, Michael, in your thoughts. Again, you've had, particularly, you've had a career that is so distinguished, but so deeply steeped in public universities. And now, of course, you oversee a system that has great diversity in terms of the types of institutions. But it seems to me that as you think about these institutions, there is a distinct character and role to the research university.
Well, yeah, I think so. I think that our role, our main product is knowledge, and we transmit knowledge from one generation generally to another. In our teaching, we sort of teach people things that we transmit knowledge to our students in that way. But we also create knowledge, and so the creation of knowledge, and as you say, a focus on what is fact and what is truth, and having those things really matter is that, I think, the cornerstone of what we do on a daily basis. And it is then a very good place to examine what we mean by the truth and what we mean by fact, and to continue to exercise ourselves in that way. So there's always more work to do, but we really are like living laboratories and testing grounds for ideas that can continue to improve, I think, and strengthen many things, including our democracy. So I think that is a very important part of who we are and what we do. And you mentioned that my career, my own education began in private institutions, but I've been at public institutions for all these years since. And we often see public institutions really caught in the political crosshairs of our evolving democracies, our evolving political systems. How do you think that higher education came to be so polarized, and is polarization a public good, or what's your feeling about that?
So, it's a really important question that you're raising, Michael. And again, as we've spent years around the big table at the American Association of Universities, which of course is equally composed of public and private institutions, you see that there's some level of controversy that we're all engulfed in. And yet I think there's something that has been quite distinctive about the controversies that have beset public institutions. So, and I should say, as Howard referred to earlier, I'm a proud graduate of the University of Toronto, a great public institution in Canada. And so for me, I too have seen these institutions from both public and private platforms. I guess, when you think about why are we sites of controversy, I think to some degree it relates to our privileged place in society. We're paid to think, to critique, to challenge. The fact is that our faculty are well compensated. They enjoy lifelong tenure. Our students receive lifelong advantages in terms of earning power, status, health, and well-being. And our campuses are idyllic often and nested in communities that don't always share our wealth. So that I think that sense of disparity, I think, is a starting point. I think part of it is surely lies in how we enjoyed considerable autonomy in the way in which we discharge our role. We are in many respects self-regulated communities that operate under our own rules. I often refer to the university as a place apart. I think part of it is that we're intrinsically places of open discourse and exchange, places where speakers are invited, students are encouraged to debate, scholars are expected to opine, and to do this all in the open. And so the cultural battles that we see raging within the country generally, not surprisingly, find a home within our institutions, and these controversies find purchase here. And I think, finally, part of it may arise out of one of the paradoxes of the university, which is that it is a fundamentally conservative institution that has long been slow to change over the centuries, even as its scholars and mission play an outsized role in pressing for social change. So I think for all of these reasons, we do stand as places and particularly public institutions that are suffused with controversy. Having said all of that, I just want to say, and be really interested, Michael, in your view, having seen this now from leadership position in two different states, but it seems to me that the attack on universities, particularly public universities, seems to be more acerbic right now. It just seems harsher. The divisions over the state of the university deeper, and seems to be cutting ever closer to the heart of American culture. And so, it may be that that this is just reflective of where America is more generally at this moment, and the suspicion of institutions, elites, and so forth have a particularly salient role. And it may also be, at least for public universities, the extent to which all of the controversies we're seeing on so many different issues have now found a really good foothold in the governance of public universities. And I think all of that combined explains this moment. But again, you're living it in a way that I'm not, Michael, and I'd really be interested in your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I'd say I appreciate your comments. I was thinking about the AAU that you mentioned, where we got a chance to know each other well. And for the audience, the AAU usually meets in a room that's not quite big enough for the number of people who are there, and they seat us alphabetically. And so I would sit for years between you and Chris Eisgruber. So I was between Princeton and Johns Hopkins, and then sometimes Berkeley was in between and whatever else. But they sat us by our own last name. So we were shoulder to shoulder for many hours over many years, and it was interesting to be in that discussion. And I'd say that the thing that I feel at our public universities is that we are connected with the political current events of the day by our students, our tens of thousands of students on most of our campuses. And so there are lots of people from different points of view. They're sharing those ideas, and we're living it. We also have a very close relationship with our state legislatures, and they work to fund us to meet the interest and the needs of their constituents and their supporters. And that really then gets into the discussion that we have from a leadership level, discussion we have with the direction of the university, what we're teaching, how we're teaching, and all of those things that we believe are the province of the faculty and the leaders of the institution are become quite interested to the elected officials in our sphere. And in Columbus, we were about 3 miles from the state capitol. So we worked with people, elected officials, on a daily basis on one or another issue, and intensely when there were big issues in society. Interestingly, that was a state in which the governor, lieutenant governor, virtually all of the statewide elected officials, and a supermajority of both houses were Republican. And so we had issues that came to us from that point of view routinely, and we had to balance what we were doing, trying to balance the academic mission with the interest of that particular political point of view. California, it's the other way around. And so on a daily basis, we are in fact connected to or working with legislators and others, representing what the university is and can be and how we should do our work, but coming from the left. And there's consistent pressure on us to move things in a direction that meets that part of the constituency. And I'd say that something that I noticed in my own experience when I believe our universities represent the entire state. And so I try to know the elected representatives from both parties and listen to the broad range of opinions that people have and try to make the best decisions going forward. But in my own interactions with the legislatures, and when I was in the state of Ohio, it was almost exclusively with members of the Republican Party. Here in California, it's almost exclusively with members from the Democratic Party. And it's interesting how that political tug is felt because at the bottom, at the end of the day, they are our funders. And so they have the sort of pressure that they can put on us with our funding, or they can pass bills that fund us to do certain things. And it's an ongoing, what word would I use? We're fully engaged with balancing our broad interest in our present and future with the political winds of the day.
For me, Michael, and I'll say this aside, I don't only speak for myself on this, but I've often felt that in a lot of ways, when one thinks about the character of private and public universities in the United States, and particularly, the universities that are members of the AAU, it's striking to see the degree to which we're really converging in mission in a lot of ways. We've become private universities much more sensitive to interactions with local community, much more attentive to issues of access and equity, and one can multiply the number of ways in which we've become more public in our orientation. And again, one of the things that I often feel burdened by is even the characterization of universities as private or public. The truth is, in terms of our funding stream, we are incredibly public at Johns Hopkins, and in terms of the way in which we discharge our responsibilities, we're not a for-profit, we're a not-for-profit organization that is strongly imbued with a public spirit. And I say that because what increasingly I think separates public and private universities in this country is governance. And the governance of public universities seems to be so much more susceptible to tugs and pulls, and particularly in a moment when social culture wars are being fed by media and so forth, much more vulnerable to that in a way that not-for-profit private universities are not. And I do think at some point we really do need to have a discussion about how we can better insulate public universities from some of the more perverse and corrosive kinds of intervention. And I know that's not what you're suggesting for California, but we do have lots of examples now from other states in the country where the interventions of a political character are really inimical to what we would understand to be the foundation of the university. And I think, again, one has to think hard about what is the best model for insulating universities from those pressures, particularly if you can be confident that if left to their own devices and having good stakeholder representation on boards and so forth, that they will actually be enormously sensitive to the kinds of issues that society wants them to be sensitive to.
Yeah, you sparked two quick comments for me. I mentioned our chatting together at AAU meetings. And if I think about my academic career in ophthalmology, I had colleagues from all over the country, and we would deal with the issues that were most important to our field. I'm in medicine and ophthalmology. I'd have no idea whether or not that person was from a public or a private university, because the real work of the work was the same. That wasn't a distinction. And so when you get behind the curtain about what we're actually doing on a daily basis, it's really working as colleagues to, as I mentioned, create and disseminate knowledge, and that all is quite supportive. But lately, as you were mentioning, there have been a lot of intrusions, or there's pressure in different parts of the country. There's a wave of state legislation that's been introduced recently, attempting to ban books and ideas from being discussed in K through 12 and other things. And how would you think that we should protect ourselves from these attempts to exert control over what can and can't be taught and learned?
Look, again, this is something where you see that it starts off in the context of discussions around K to 12 education and what's appropriate and not appropriate for students to be exposed to. And then, of course, you worry that it starts to filter out from that setting into universities. And, it's really instructive. I was surprised by this, but even coming to learn that in some of the states where there have been restrictions on certain books that are available to students in public schools, it turns out public libraries are also being pressured to remove those books. So even adults are unable to get access to them. So I think this is a really disturbing trend, and particularly when we see a lot of the attacks are now being mounted around critical race theory. And again, I think one can have the legitimate debate about how one thinks about K to 12 education, what appropriate themes in terms of American history are introduced at what times and in which way and so forth. But that debate seems to me to be a very different one from the risk that starts to infiltrate into the university and taking legitimate important areas of academic inquiry and seeking to shut them down and say that this is impermissible inquiry within the context of a major research university. And so here, I think this is where, the hope is that we're able to be persuasive and vigorous in our defense of the importance of academic freedom, and essentially giving our colleagues, our students and faculty colleagues, the opportunity to explore a number of different perspectives on whether it's social, historical, political, economic, scientific phenomenon. But fundamentally, our institutions, I think, stand for an important idea, which is one of humility, of real modesty about what we do and don't know. And the sense is that the best way to get closer to that ever elusive ideal of truth is to let people develop their case, make their arguments, subject them to close and sometimes withering scrutiny and attack. But nevertheless, it's in that world in which there's a large zone of protection for academic freedom that we're able to get closer to this ideal of truth. And that's something that is so important for us to be doing, so that we can bolster the other institutions in society, like media, like other education institutions, even K-12, that can draw on our claims and be confident that they're pretty robust. So I think this moment really requires a very self-conscious reaffirmation of our commitment to that central value in our institutions, and hoping that is able to filter out and inform some of these debates that are taking place in, for instance, K-12 education.
Yeah, you as you mentioned in recently, last few years, and particularly the issues of free speech and diversity have garnered significant attention broadly in the political discourse. And one of the 4 functions of the university that you identify in your book is purposeful pluralism. Can you define what purposeful pluralism means in this context, and what ways have you think that we have succeeded in this regard, and in what ways can we do better?
Michael, I talk about purposeful pluralism as a distinct role that universities can play, and in particular, the idea is that we are blessed with, and we've become increasingly sensitive to the need to recruit students from a broader array of backgrounds than we have, at least generations ago, seen come to our institutions. There was a time that these were truly monolithic institutions, all men, all white, and we have seen, over the years, over the decades, much as way in which we've seen a gradual expansion, enlargement, at least until recently, in terms of the Democratic franchise, so too we have seen the character of our student populations change quite dramatically. But what I worry about is that we've got representational diversity. We've got enormous diversity by race, by ethnicity, by political perspective, socioeconomic background, geographic background, and so forth. But the question is whether or not we're actually harvesting the benefit of the interaction of these different perspectives within our communities. And so here, what I think is important, particularly in a setting where there's so much distrust in those who come from a political perspective that may be different from your own, we become important sites where perhaps we can imbue students with the habits, the capacities to be able to interact, to collaborate across difference in a way that we're seeing, quite frankly, the broad population right now being less successful at. But that requires, I think, effort. And so, very quickly, one of the things that I think is really important, and I think relates to some of the general themes of this conference is, how do we move off of events on campus where typically we have single speakers who are coming into our campuses, and they're basically speaking to people who already share the same views, predilections, and instead try and construct moments in our university life where we're bringing together people from different political perspectives so they can debate with one another, interact with one another, in some sense model the ideas of civic friendship, which don't require us to agree on underlying values, but at least to be able to understand what values we might agree on, how we navigate the difference. And maybe sometimes the differences aren't about values, but it's more about the modes of action that we're going to take to advance those values. And maybe that's where, again, we can see that there's a possibility through engagement of doing better with one another. So I think that the shift to more debate on campus, I think, would be healthy. And then the other thing that that we have done recently at Hopkins, and again, we're not first movers on this, we're following others, but has been to end the ability of students to choose their roommates on coming into the institution, and basically we're going back into the business of placing students. And again, the literature is so robust in seeing that students who end up living with people who are really fundamentally different from themselves end up doing really well in terms of their lifelong skills at negotiating differences, and also appear to be much more likely to be engaged in voting and other types of civic participation. So again, we have a moment to model this on our campuses, and that's what I'm urging us to be very intentional in exploiting.
So I hate to jump in and interrupt for a moment, because this has been such a fascinating conversation, and I'm grateful to both of you for your candor and your insights. But we do have a couple of audience questions that I thought I would go ahead and interject if that works. One directed to you, President Daniels. It says, I'm curious as to President Daniels' thoughts about the flip side, what democracy owes universities. Again, referring to the elected leaders who politicized universities in unprecedented ways and made it harder and harder to meet our missions.
So, I think these arguments are really important, and they are reciprocal. There are things that we owe society, and then I believe there are things that are owed back to us. If you are to believe that we are vital institutions for the survival and flourishing of democracy. And so, again, to be more concrete, I think something that I know Michael feels very powerfully about, and he spoke about this a few days ago in New York, but the recommitment of the federal government to support increased Pell Grants. That's an important way in which, quite apart from the things we need to do to improve the prospects for students from low-income backgrounds coming to our institutions, I think the federal government acknowledging the significant erosion in the real value of Pell assistance, and at a minimum doubling the Pell Grant. I would ideally like to see the federal government do more than that. But again, I think that idea of ensuring means-tested financial assistance to students so we can ensure the promise of equal opportunity in this country, and to be able to respond to this skew towards higher income students coming into our institutions is really important. I think the discussion that we had earlier today about trying to think about ways in which we can channel, restrict, shape in constructive ways the roles of political influence on public institutions is really important. I think, again, when we look back over the decade plus that I've been president of Johns Hopkins, there are many moments where I've been really horrified about the kinds of interventions that some of our colleagues have had to deal with, either through the executive or legislative branch, and the extent to which intrusions are made that are so destructive of the core functioning of the institution. And again, I think this is something where that if we're right, that the freedom to be able to think, to challenge, to create is fundamental and does generate significant benefits for society on a host of different dimensions, then we've got to ensure that we've got a set of institutional arrangements that discipline the possibility that those goals might be in some way compromised in a moment of intense passion around some particular, typically social cultural issue.
President Drake, do you want to add to that?
Just a tiny aside, but I'd love to hear the audience questions more. And I'd say that we have these pressures. I guess I wanted to make sure for the audience that I'd say something that's balanced. Overwhelmingly, our elected officials are supportive of us, and they're enthusiastically supportive of us. And they, my institution receives billions of dollars of support from our state government each year, and they do that supporting and cheering the things that we do. So I want to make sure that fundamental truth is not obscured by the fact that at the edge, during times of great political interest, there can be pushes and tugs and things that we have to fight against. Overwhelmingly, we're supported by this, and we feel very lucky. I think American higher education is the envy of the world in so many reasons, for many reasons, but one is that there's been a great support of the institution of higher education for all of these many decades. So I want to say that first. And then the second thing really is that just the focus, as we spoke of earlier, of our own commitment to the living up to our ideals and values of creating quality knowledge and knowing that the truth matters and doing what we can to share that with people. And then to try to share that in a way that we don't have barriers to inclusion that keep segments of society away, or that kind of predetermine the outcomes that we're going to get. We were together last week at a thing called the American Talent Initiative, and really focused there on the fact that most of our very best institutions have a disproportionate share of students from the upper part of the income distribution represented in their student bodies. And therefore, rather than being equalizers in society, we work as accelerators for those with means and as barriers to those who began with disadvantages. And so we want to make sure that our institutions do what they can to close those gaps and to really provide a pathway to the future for talent, no matter where it occurs in the country. And this is a great collaboration. The ATI is a great collaboration of public and private universities, and I think that's the way it should be.
Wonderful. Okay, I think we have time to get to at least one more question. This one reads, Dr. Daniels outlines what higher education institutions do for democracy, and I agree with these things, but many individual scholars take this one step further and interpret the university democracy connection to mean that individual scholars should be activists in the classroom and in their research. Do you see scholar activism as fulfilling the mission of the university or as undermining the public trust in higher education? And I'll let either one of you begin.
So why don't I take a start? I think we have to be sensitive to the concern that we're increasingly hearing, and is being confirmed in terms of various climate surveys that have been done on our campuses, that students feel that there are orthodoxies that one very carefully navigates around within the university, and to transgress those, and in some ways to in any way be transgressive and to challenge those orthodoxies is socially perilous. And I think that's something that we really have to worry about. And again, I know Howard and I know Michael in their own work and advocacy have been very sensitive to this issue, as at least I have sought to be. But I think that there's got to be a balance, that you can have moments where you've got faculty who want to demonstrate the ability to take ideas in the classroom and move them out into the field, and whether it's in local, national, or international settings, I think that's valuable to show the extent to which ideas connect with action and the difference they can make. And so, there's no way that you'd want to diminish the scope for that kind of connectivity being demonstrated and modeled by your faculty. On the other hand, if it results in a chilling effect in a classroom where students feel that they can't challenge the claims that are made about how ideas lead to action, whether there's, where there's significant self-censorship going on. I think that's where we worry about the inimical effect of this kind of activism. So I think the truth is we can have both things. I think you can have the demonstration of the linkage between ideas and action, but at the same time create a climate in which the faculty in particular are extremely sensitive to not creating a chilling effect that would discourage students from raising questions about the core claims that are made in that context.
Thank you. President Drake, do you want to have the final word?
Yeah, I just say I would agree entirely. And we talked about creating and sharing of knowledge, so the kind of research on one side and then the teaching on the other side. And I think that faculty, all of us, as we're creating knowledge, can be as opinionated, directed, et cetera, as we wish to be in the research side of things. I think we have to be thoughtful as we're teaching to then teach more broadly and to make sure that we're not teaching one particular point of view as though that is the only or best or most balanced way of moving forward. And I think that's where the tension that we see in some of the reactions that people are expressing to their feeling of not being able to have a view that's, for instance, different than the political point of view of the faculty member. I think that that's regrettable. I think that we really do want to bring people and ideas together and use our universities as a marketplace of ideas. And so I think that we have to continually make sure that whether or not as an individual we feel strongly about a particular political point of view, as we are presenting this in the teaching and learning part of the enterprise, that we have a chance to balance our own views as such with those of others and other points of view. And I think that makes us stronger as we move forward.
Well, we have reached time. I just want to reiterate my heartfelt gratitude to both of you. When I read your book, President Daniels, my immediate thought was, I would like this to be a conversation, and I'd like that conversation to be with the chair of the center, which is President Drake, and it has exceeded even my very high expectations. So thank you again to both of you. And with that, we are actually going to change our vantage point a tiny bit, though in a very related way, which is that we're going to move from this 10,000-foot view of higher education's role in safeguarding democracy to some inspiring on-the-ground efforts to affect change by UC students in their communities. But before you meet these incredible student leaders, we have an opportunity to hear from Yvette Alexander, Director of Learning and Impact at the Knight Foundation, a national organization working to foster informed and engaged communities. In January, Knight issued its fourth report, measuring college students' attitudes on free expression and campus speech since 2016. Yvette's going to take a couple moments to share some key trends from Knight's research before I introduce you to our next panelists. Welcome, Yvette.
Thanks so much, Michelle. It's great to be here at Speech Matters. Before we hear from students in our next panel who are committed to using their voice on campus, I'd like to take a moment to share what Knight has been learning from 2 decades of student views on speech and expression, both in general and in the university environment. So we started with surveying high school students back in 2004, and we moved on to college students in 2016, so we have some really interesting trend data. This year, in 2022, we released a survey of 4,000 US adults and another report based on 1,000 college students, which examines how attitudes toward speech and expression have changed since the 2020 racial justice movement and presidential election. So I want to highlight a few key trends that we are seeing over time. Can you go to the next slide, please? And go ahead, one more. So students continue to believe the First Amendment rights and concepts of free speech, the principles behind free speech, are important to democracy. A full 84% of college students say speech rights are extremely or very important, which is pretty in line with the general population. Next slide. But when we asked about all of the rights that are expressed in the First Amendment, we see that the percentage of students saying that speech rights are secure in the country today have fallen quite dramatically if you look to the far left of the screen. Every year since the question was first asked by us in 2016 in our Gallup poll. So this includes a 12-point decrease from just the last time we surveyed in 2019. And we also see an increasing number of students that say that free speech rights are in some way threatened. We have also seen great declines for freedom of the press as well as other First Amendment rights. So really critical changes and attitudes to be aware of today. Next slide. While a majority of college students express confidence that the First Amendment protects people like themselves, we see that students of color, there's meaningful differences when you look at students of color. So Black students in particular feel or express that they feel much less protected. And we see a very sharp decline from 2019 to 2021. Only 5% say that they feel protected by the First Amendment a great deal. And this should be of concern for anyone wanting to promote speech on campus and in a society at large. Now, in the next slide, when it comes specifically to speech at college and in a university environment, a majority of students believe and say it's important for colleges to be exposed to a wide range of speech, even if they find it offensive or biased. So, we see 59% saying that they do want to be exposed to various types of speech, offensive speech and biased speech. However, we have found that students draw the line when it comes to speech that targets racial groups, for instance, slurs and things like that. So most students do agree, across the political spectrum, across the demographic spectrum, that for colleges instituting policies that restrict the use of slurs on campus, other types of speech that target minority groups, but a large majority are very much against the restriction of any political speech, even if it's offensive or biased. So that's an interesting trend there. And just 1 in 4 students favor schools disinviting, for example, controversial speakers. That's down from more than 2 in 5 in 2019. And similarly, the number of students who support safe spaces and speech codes has fallen over the past 2 years. The last trend I want to highlight is that more students now, up to 65% from 54%, say the climate at school prevents them from saying things that others might find offensive. So some degree of self-censorship. And we also found that fewer say they're comfortable disagreeing in class with professors or other students. We also, interestingly see that more students are reporting feeling unsafe or uncomfortable because of comments made on campus as compared to our survey in 2019. And students saying that they feel unsafe or uncomfortable due to speech is particularly high amongst female students and students of color. Well, that's the last trend I wanted to highlight. At Knight, we hope a better and more nuanced understanding of student feelings and experiences regarding speech helps improve the way our universities promote speech on campus. And I hope it adds context for the rest of the discussions today. To view our surveys in full, please visit kf.org/free speech. Thank you so much.
Yvette, thank you so much for joining us. And I hope folks will take a look at the interesting work that Knight is doing and give some thought to how that is similar or different from your own experience on campus. And with that, we're going to turn to our student leaders. I'm going to start by introducing you to the exceptional moderator of our Students and Civic Impact panel, and that is Dr. Sandra Bass. Sandra currently serves as Associate Dean of Students and the Director of the Public Service Center at UC Berkeley. Go Bears. I've had the distinct pleasure of collaborating with Sandra on center programming over the past years. I am continually inspired by her and by her commitment to affecting social change, and I'm so pleased to welcome you to Speech Matters, Sandra.
Thank you so much. What a pleasure to be here, and greetings, everyone. And such a gracious introduction, Michelle. And I'm really happy to have this opportunity to moderate our conversation with our exceptional student leaders. Also, I wanted to thank Evett for sharing the Knight Foundation's research on student attitudes towards the First Amendment, and specifically free speech and a free press. Much of that resonates with what I've seen and heard on my campus, and some of it was new and thought-provoking, so I really appreciate that. So I'd like to start our conversation today by asking our panelists some questions for a few minutes, and then we'll turn to all of you to ask your questions. So please feel free throughout our conversation to share your questions in the chat, and we'll do our best to get as many of them as we can. So hello, Monsi, Aiden, and Tiffany, welcome. So I'd love for you all to start by telling us a bit about yourselves, such as the campus that you're at and your year, what civic engagement work you're involved in, and what drew you to do that work.
I can start off. Oh, sorry, Tiffany, go ahead.
It's okay, Monty. Start.
Okay, sure. So hi, everyone. My name is Monty. I'm a sophomore at UC Berkeley studying business administration and political science. And I currently lead all civic engagement and voter participation related initiatives on campus through my position as the director of the AACC Vote Coalition. So some of the other roles I hold include being an Andrew Goodman ambassador, a Neiman Civic Fellow, as well as a voice recipient in association with the center. In regards to, how I first got interested in civic engagement, I'd say that it was largely, based on my upbringing and influenced by my upbringing. So I'm an international student from Singapore, and Singapore is a country where it's compulsory to vote. And so growing up, I had the belief that's one duty to their country to use their vote and to use their voice to, make their voice be heard. And then coming to the US, I think I was pretty, shocked to see how low voter turnout numbers were, especially at UC Berkeley when we pride ourselves on being engaged in citizens. So I made it my mission as a student to do something about this. And, our student government, the AACC, seemed like a perfect platform for me to achieve this goal and work towards it. So I'd say that's why I've been engaged for the past few years, and I hope to continue to be engaged for the rest of my college career.
Thanks, Tiffany.
Hi, everybody. My name is Tiffany, and I'm a fourth year at UCSB. I'm a poli-sci and Asian American Studies double major, and my role in civic engagement has been through my work for the UC Disaster Resilience Network, for which I'm a student assistant, and I'm also an inaugural Dean's Fellow for, and I'm also involved in the goal of eventually establishing campus-based committees across all 10 campuses, with my concentration being the UCSB chapter. And I first became involved after enrolling in a year-long civic engaged scholars course, which was funded by the Voice Grant that my professors, 3 women faculty on campus, applied for and received, which has helped me with actualizing this. And in this class, we've met with local government officials, various professors and student regents who have offered great advice on community engagement and leadership skills. And what really drew me in was just the idea of connecting students to faculty and staff as a joint team moving towards one goal. For the course, it was students being more involved in the community, and for UCDRN, it was with disaster prep and seeing eye to eye. And really this was just based on as well, similar to Monsi, just my upbringing and wanting to bring this activism onto campus.
All right, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Aiden Lin. I'm a second-year political science major at UC San Diego, and I really started getting involved with civic participation in my first year of college, where I was hired as the government affairs director for my Office of Local Affairs for student government, and I attended our first kind of lobbying meeting where I met with a staffer from one of our council members' offices in San Diego. And this is where I really realized that local government is where you can speak almost directly to, if not directly to, your representative, speak about the issues that matter to you, and regardless of your age, what you look like, you can make your voice heard. And so that was the start of everything. I went on to become the Associate Vice President of Local Affairs, which is my position now. I'm also the Executive Director of Our Time to Act United, a 501c3 nonprofit that is youth founded, that's focused on youth empowerment and engaging youth voices in our political processes, specifically at the local level. So it's a pleasure to be here with everyone, and I'm looking forward to this discussion.
Thank you so much. So can each of you speak a little bit, based on your experience, how do you think we can increase civic engagement and getting students to rally around civic engagement initiatives on your campus? And maybe Tiffany, you can start this time.
I think it really just starts with like breaking the wall between students and faculty and making sure students feel heard, that there's these more open lines to communication. Professors, they want to help students and students want to help professors and vice versa, but there's this hesitancy that I've personally felt as well, which is why I think courses like the Civic Scholars Program are great as they provide this space, but there's also opportunities outside of an academic setting, and part of that really is just increasing the initiative in students for making them feel like their space at the community, like in their university, is valued, and that it's like not just the next phase, but that they can contribute and make lasting contributions that serve as foundations that follow after graduation.
Thanks. How about you, Aiden?
Yeah, I really think being heard, but more than that, being listened to matters, right? We all have this desire that when we have a need, especially if it's a basic need, that's fulfilled, and that the people around you acknowledge that and they work with you to go the extra mile to get you that what you need, right? And so I think recently across the UCs, housing has been a really big issue, and that's what I focused on and what a lot of students really care about when students have to live in cars and don't have the resources that they need to get a proper education, really. So I think when campus administration and student leaders can work together to fulfill these needs in a meaningful way, I think it really shows students that their voice does matter, and that they should speak up and they should work within the community to achieve these goals.
I think that, Aiden brings up a really important point about focusing on local issues and helping students understand why civic engagement is important. So I think that, at least in my work, we see that voter apathy is a big issue, why, voter turnout numbers are so low. And that's something that we as a coalition try to combat. So some people don't even care about, the propositions of the candidates, or it's hard to get them to care about that when they're so focused on their local issues. So at least in my work, there are things that we focus on, like Aiden mentioned, things like student housing, doubling the Pell Grant, or issues around UCPD. So really speaking with relevant actors, I think, within these issues to develop a nonpartisan view and then educate students is really important. I think that, another thing would be collaborating with students. Before the 2020 election, our coalition worked with different ACUC senators and student organizations to, hear them out, hear what issues impact them, and then tailor our efforts to see, how we can tailor our efforts to engage them in issues that are important to them and work towards their issues. And then really keeping a proper database to make sure that we're in constant communication with them. And then lastly, I just want to hit on, accessibility is a big thing. So, for us at the ACU Vote Coalition, this looks like hosting fun, exciting events to engage students. So we had Voteella, which was a music concert with the theme of, the importance of voting, getting people to register vote. We had Civ Hacks, which was a hackathon tailored towards STEM students, given that, STEM students really turn out in the lowest numbers among all college students. But, and then even like accessible voter locations was something that, I work with Sandra to establish on campus. We had 3 this past election season. This was really helpful, having the place on campus so students don't have to seek out or go out of their way to cast their vote. So I think just really putting all the information from students and making it easy accessible for them is really important.
Thanks. I really appreciate you sharing what faculty and administrators can do to support the work that you all do. I'm curious, on my campus, I see a lot of peer encouragement, like student to student outreach. And can you all speak a little bit to how important that is, of peers encouraging and engaging students to be involved?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's really encouraging when you see someone else that looks like you, that's the same age as you out there in the community that's doing this work. Like, I wouldn't be here if it weren't for my predecessor, who was an amazing leader in this local area, and she encouraged me, right? She gave me the strength and courage to stand up and to speak as well. And so I think in general, the more student activism, the more students that are engaged in civic participation, the more that you can encourage people that they're not alone and that they can also stand up, they can also vote, they can also get engaged, easier than maybe the people that were the first. And I think that applies to a lot of different areas too. I'm sure we can all relate to that in our lives.
I just want to echo what Aiden said. Like my predecessor, Miyako, was also a huge influence on me and the work that I do today. And I think, she was really instrumental in setting up the foundation for me. So, setting up the committees and pipelines through which I can talk to admin, or, telling me what resources I can rely on, or having those different connections within the city of Berkeley. So really just, having people to look up to, not just, those who are the same age, maybe like just a year older, is really important to have a role model there, and someone to help guide you. But then again, echoing what Aiden said, having people around you to rally you and have that support, because oftentimes having these initiatives pass and having, success in your different events has to do with, how many people show out and how many people are supporting something. So just really seeing everyone come together is really heartwarming and encourages you to keep working at what you do, even though, you don't see the impact of your work every day.
Yeah, like in support of what the both of them have said, I also agree that like student engagement is really important, with wanting like the peer advisors that are similar in experience with you, because I feel like for me, one of the walls has just been with like in academic settings, feeling nervous of approaching them. So then when there are students that are similar in age to me, it just feels more of a connection. When I first came to the university, it was the EOP peer education opportunity, peer advisors that really did help me understand how to even send out an email to a professor in a professional way, things like that I didn't know beforehand.
I just want to build off, if possible, too. Both what Mansi and Tiffany have said, with a personal experience in our efforts in San Diego to include students in this city redistricting process. It's really intimidating, right, to give public comment to a public hearing, especially over Zoom, where you feel so isolated. You're speaking into this blank screen to people that don't even look like they're listening all the time. But I think what was really helpful, and the feedback that we received afterwards, was when you had a student speak right before you, right, and you agreed with what they said, and you think this is an important issue, and nothing bad happened, right? Nothing catastrophic happened because they spoke out, right? Then they felt empowered to do the same, and then it just kind of kept going on and on until we had over 120 students speak throughout the entire process, and so that was very encouraging. And I think people in San Diego, especially the political leaders, understand the importance now of students and their needs and getting involved, and that's further serving as the foundation for future students to build upon.
I love that. Thank you so much. I want to turn back to thinking about the university space itself. And, it strikes me that universities are by design co-generational spaces. So obviously, the faculty, administrators, and students, but even our students are becoming more co-generational, as we have more non-traditional students. And yet we don't consciously cultivate intergenerational engagement. And there's often a generation gap between particularly administrators, faculty, and students. So how do you think we can better overcome this gap and work together across generations more intentionally?
I think this is a really great question. And I guess the root of it is just knowing that, we're all working towards a common purpose, and that, we can all benefit from learning from each other. I think oftentimes student, faculty, and admin want to work isolated, and think that, each knows the best. But I feel like we can really, come up with the best solutions when we play to each other's strengths. So I'd say that, students know the best ways to engage each other's. They know what formats make it easy to understand information, what channels students use most frequently, and generally what would interest students. With faculty, some of them have really deep expertise in some areas of civic engagement, and we students can definitely learn on that, and take knowledge from there. And I'd say that admin on that side, they know, how we can frame our different initiatives and events so that we get buy-in and approval from admin, and ultimately be able to carry it out. So I'd say that, once we're able to acknowledge what role each other plays and create a space for each other to contribute and to collaborate, that's the most powerful way to take advantage of generational differences, that can actually be, the most powerful thing and the most important thing when it comes to collaborating and working towards civic engagement.
Like echoing off of what Montia said, I think it really just involves also compromise and like hearing each other out, but also the compromise of wanting to respect those perspectives. So like working together involves that compromise. So for my experience has been with social media, many older generations may not necessarily see the value in it, and thus like will place it on the back burner for raising awareness. But as like social media is often the first point of contact for students, so it should be prioritized, and that's one of like the examples of reaching that compromise between generations and seeing that value.
Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said thus far. Um, and I also once again want to draw upon my own experiences and the experiences of student leaders around me. The most successful kind of initiatives come from when student leaders and admin show allyship with each other, and they collaborate, and they unite as one front, and they have different opinions, different expertises, like has been said, but both sides respect the opinions of one another, and they work toward a common goal, because at the end of the day, all of our goals, are united in one, or they should be. We're all trying to create a better tomorrow through education, through experience, right? And through the continuing success of the institutions that support us. And so when we realize that, then we can hopefully come together a little easier, and collaborate and work with one another, drawing upon student experiences, our ability to facilitate honest feedback from our peers, and also the administrators' career experience and their time at the university, as well as their management skills and whatnot. I think that's really the point that I want to get at.
Yeah, absolutely. So just reflecting back on when you embarked on your civic engagement journey, what do you wish you had known, particularly coming in as an undergrad? And what would you tell other students entering college who want to be involved in civic engagement?
I'd say personally, the biggest learning for me was that you don't have to know everything, and that it's a learning experience. So, I came in as an international student. I did my first year remotely in Singapore, and the general elections were coming up, and I was placed in the position of GOTV manager, which is get out the vote manager. So it's pretty daunting, being an international student, not knowing much about how US elections work, but then having this really important and ambiguous role to try to get students to register or vote in an online setting. So I think it was pretty daunting at first, but I quickly realized I had so many resources around me that I could rely on, be it, students and peers within the Vote Coalition, different administrators and faculty who supported and believed in our work. And, even politicians and professors who, came to speak with us, and wanted to learn more about our work and, contribute their feedback and their knowledge. So just knowing that there's such a big community around you that you can rely on and learn from, was really inspiring and really helpful to make me feel like, I can go in and treat this as a learning experience. And through my learnings, I can come with my background, and impart something on this journey, and on others. So, and just, I guess, lastly, just knowing that even if you don't know everything, your background really contributes to your work and, can help others. So everyone brings their own experience, be it knowledge or, skills, etc.
For me, I think the thing that stuck with me is that we as youth and students, we feel like sometimes we feel like no one's listening to us, but in reality, I think the world is kind of deprived of youth input and perspective. And when you get out there, there are people who reach out to you and say, "Hey, thank you so much for speaking out. We really appreciated your input, and we want more of that. We need more youth to speak out, and we need more youth to say what they feel." And so, because of that, I'd say, like, do it. Just go out, do something, give public comment, speak to a local representative, and you don't need to know everything, like Muncie said, but if you begin the process, you begin the journey, then your allies will come to you. You'll be reinforced by strong relationships and people that care about what you're advocating for, and then that's kind of how you take off. So you don't need everything to be in your pocket before you go. You just gotta get out there first, and then people will support you.
Yeah, I really agree with what Hayden and Monty have said with wanting to be heard and be listened to, and just using like my personal experience as well in my background. I'm a like first generation low income student, and I think with that comes definitely the feelings of imposter syndrome. I think many college students experience that as well. So there is that hesitancy. So like Aiden mentioned, just the initiative to put in that work, and like wanting to be.
Great. So we have some really thoughtful questions in the Q&A, but I want to have an opportunity for each of you to speak to the particular issue that you're passionate about. So let me ask you just a few questions related to that, and then we'll turn to some of our audience questions. So I'm going to start with you, Tiffany, because you've been working on disaster resilience, which has been so important to so many of our campuses, particularly here in California, if not around the country. What advice would you give to students and universities preparing our campuses and our students to be more resilient in the face of disasters?
My advice is really that there's already great resources in the UC system, and it's really just about connecting and strengthening the ties across the UC system and also in the communities that they're surrounding. So with viewing like disaster preparedness, we often think of it mostly of just environmental disasters, but there's facets beyond that, including socioeconomic equity, environmental sustainability, and just communities. So more importantly, I think really what it is just the health and well-being of folks when they face unprecedented challenges. So like creating those resources that are already there, but creating a stronger support and network of wanting to find them and connect between them, as there is this intersection between them. So
thanks, Tiffany. And I have the pleasure of working with Monsi on our campus around voter engagement. And I know we're ramping up for the midterms. So Monsi, can you share a bit about how you and your fellow students are preparing for the midterm elections, and how are you planning to mobilize students to be engaged?
Sure. So I would say that our biggest initiative that, Sandra's been a really integral part of is our Election Day holiday campaign. And what this would be is an asynchronous day for students to, attendance will not be recorded. There'd be no midterms, but it would be, classes held on Zoom. So we're pretty used to that. We have the infrastructure to do that. And this would basically allow students to go out to vote. So, oftentimes students, even faculty and admin, find it hard to fit in time during their day to go out and cast a vote. And this is a real big problem because, school or work or teaching should not come before, giving out your voice and making the most of democracy. But in addition to being a holiday, it'd also be a day of community engagement. So students can get involved in community service, work at the polls, encourage their peers to vote through phone banking and text banking. So engage in community engagement in a various number of ways. I'd say that, we have some other really exciting events on the horizon. So we'll be hosting a second Vochella in the fall, which we're really excited about. We're planning a panel with Congresswoman Barbara Lee, as well as Professor Robert Reich, also for the end of the semester. So really exciting opportunities for students just to come out and learn more about the importance of voting and why should they turn out. And then we'll obviously have, our generic events that we have every semester that have proven to be pretty successful in getting people to register to vote. So voter registration drives, having nonpartisan voter guides, and phone banking leading up to the registration deadline. So, we'll be doing all this together in synchronous, and, hopefully we'll surpass our registration numbers from last year.
Great, thank you. And Aiden, what really comes through in the work that you do is how much you want to support students in becoming community and civic engagement advocates. So what do you hope to ignite and catalyze and encouraging students to be advocates?
That's a great question. Thank you for asking it. The main goal, of course, it's about the individual youth that want to be able to speak out and to have the experience and the skills necessary to do just that. But I think what we're hoping to ignite and catalyze is even broader than that. We hope to create and foster a society and a community that cares about youth perspectives and doesn't just care, but also includes youth in the decision-making processes, because I think we do offer very valuable insight to how things should be run, especially as it relates to how to approach and how to engage youth in democracy. And so to do that, I think, of course, getting youth, making them be trailblazers for change is important, but also to create a pipeline of leaders who have come from their experience of youth empowerment and eventually move out of the youth category, become their youth are adults, but become older, older leaders that do also care about youth and their perspectives, because that's where they came from, right? So that general transformation of society is what we're hoping to achieve.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So I'm going to turn to our first question from the audience. And this is from Lionel, and he's asking about students who want to express themselves, but maybe self-censoring because they fear antisocial, in quotes, antisocial punishment by peers and our faculty or people in general. What can we do to teach students about open-mindedness and being open to ideas and different perspectives? Anyone want to take that on first?
This is a really great question. I think, something that I wonder about a lot on the UC Berkeley campus, given that we're such a progressive campus, but thinking about, what voices may we be shutting out or marginalizing due to this fact. And, I'm a strong believer that the best way that we can, promote open-mindedness and have people share their ideas is providing safe spaces for this. And I think that, oftentimes safe spaces is a concept that's not understood by most, but the way that at least I interpret it is, a space where everyone has an opportunity to share their ideas, where everyone is heard out. And there is productive, conversation around, why people believe their ideas to be right. But also, what they're understanding from the alternate point of view. I think another thing that can really help, cultivate open-mindedness and encourage more students to be open-minded is by having different, alliance groups and people who share their same ideas. So at least on the UC Berkeley campus within the student government, we see this through, having different senators represent different communities and groups. So, seeing someone in a position of leadership who is representing your point of views is really empowering, I think, for you to stand up and for you to join forces with them. But then also on the same platform, being able to see multiple different senators come with multiple different viewpoints, and then all come together and contribute to, the governing of our student government and our school is really empowering. So yeah, I'd say focusing on one, having people who share your same views to help you open up, be that just, a small community, but helping people find those similar people. And then second, having those safe spaces to open up for dialogue and learn from each other.
That was such a brilliant answer. I'm not sure if I can live up to it, but great job, Mansi. I agree with you. And I think defaulting to my personal experience, even as a student leader, I feel like I felt that before too, among my colleagues, and just, this is small things, but they matter, right? And I think what it takes is leaders, both students and non-students, who are willing to, and actually go more than just willing, they push for other opinions to be included, and to call upon everyone's individual experiences to a time where they felt like they were shunned or where they were shut out from sharing their opinion, and using that to find the courage to allow other perspectives to be brought to light, and to have an open and honest discussion about it, as long as it doesn't put down other groups, and it doesn't encourage or facilitate any sort of hate speech or something like that. But that's where I stand on this.
Great. Tiffany, any thoughts?
Yeah, just that I agree with the both of them, that it really is just about feeling that openness, like even though there are experiences of hesitancy to just do so, because it is such a diverse campus across all the campuses, there will be people that are similar thoughts. So just sharing them, I'm sure that there will be a community within that you can find.
Yeah. Before I go to the next question, I just have to share with you all that you're getting a lot of love in the chat and the Q&A. People are very impressed with you. So if you get a chance, take a look. So the next question is from Elaine, and she's asking, how are you seeing your education, especially your civic / community engagement experience, contributing to your philosophy of how you want to live your life and influence the future of the world? A small question. Aiden, do you want to start us off?
Sure, I can try. I really appreciate this question, and this is something that I'm still grappling with day to day, of course, as I do go into the future. But I think it's very empowering. I think it's not just the theoretical you can do this, but the practical and the lived experiences that show that we can do this, right? That we can be involved, that we can speak, and it also has exposed me to a lot of different perspectives, just like the last question kind of asked about, that I have been reflective of on my own opinions, and have changed the way that I've lived and pledged to live for the rest of my life. So I think it's a very individual kind of journey that I've undertaken, but I love where it's going, and I hope it continues.
Awesome.
I think Aiden answered that really well. And that, our work continuously influences, what we think about the future. But I think that, most of us don't really know where that's going to take us. But something that has changed over the past 2 years is, at first, I simply saw my civic engagement and forward participation work as being something I do for student government, something I do as an extracurricular. But now it's so deeply embedded in my life, because these are people who I choose to surround myself with every day. And people who I love learning from, and that I've been exposed to so many different opportunities, been connected with, students doing this work all across the country. And, I think it's been really empowering to see how deeply people believe in this, and, what impact I've been able to make over the past 2 years. And it doesn't feel like a burden or like a job, never really did. So I think that this work will be something I continue to do throughout my life, no matter what career I choose.
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier in the panel, I'm first generation. I'm a first generation college student, so many of the experiences that I've had on campus are very, very new to me. And seeing that has just been growing, and with growing, making those steps, as Monty has mentioned, it wasn't just to build on your resume, but more so just for your experiences and creating that day-to-day connection with those people. It really just sees how they've grown as well, especially the people, and connecting them with your influence.
Wonderful. So I think we're going to be wrapping up our time together in this conversation. But before we do that, I just want to make sure, is there anything that we didn't ask you that you'd like to share, or any parting thoughts you'd like to share with the audience?
Yeah, I'd love to. Something caught my eye to a question that we don't have time for per se, but I'd love to address is looking at other conservative activists on campus, and I really believe that that there are spaces where it's not actually kind of fully about progressive or conservative, and I think one of those spaces is local politics, where it tends to be more nonpartisan. But I've worked with a large range of student activists and students that hold different perspectives, and I really appreciate each and every one of them contributing to civic engagement and participating in our democracy, because it's so important, and everyone has different approaches, but at the end of the day we want very similar things, right? We want a successful future, and in the case that we were working on in students and on campus, we want basic needs like housing, and so I want to put that out there. I really appreciated working with everyone that I have, and I appreciate being on this panel with every one of you, and this encouraging audience. Thank you.
Thanks, Aiden.
I just want to echo what Aiden said on that question. I think that oftentimes, we may see these issues as progressive, but they're really just, a basic thing that everyone needs. Everyone wants to be able to, express their voice, to cast a vote. So being able to, find that common ground and advocate for it in a nonpartisan way is really integral to at least the work that I do in my capacity in the ACC Vote Coalition. And just as a parting thought, I just want to thank Sandra for, moderating this panel, and Michelle for organizing, as well as everyone else behind the scenes. And I'd really hope to, have more opportunities to put students on a platform like this and for others to hear our thoughts, as well as to, spotlight different faculty and admin who are doing so much of the critical work behind the scenes that we don't often get to see.
Yes, I wanted to thank everyone as well for listening today and for joining in on this conversation.
Thank you. Writer and educator Terry Tempest Williams has said that the human heart is the first home of democracy. And I want to express our deepest gratitude to Tiffany and Monsi and Aiden for showing us how democracy lives in your hearts through your insights, but also through your actions. So much gratitude for your wisdom. I know that I'm full today, having heard from you. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Michelle.
Well, I was going to say, I'm going to make a note to self, don't follow Sandra when you're trying to do a close. That is exactly how I feel. As a professional in this space, as a parent raising young children who I want to be engaged in the world, I am actually just in awe of your courage and your inspiration and your wisdom. And I tried to write you each little messages, but just letting you know that I really resonated with the things that you were so honest about sharing imposter syndrome and feeling like you have to know everything. These are not just things that students struggle with. And the fact that you're able to showcase that is really amazing. So yes, we are deeply grateful. And Monsi, we are going to do this and continue to find additional ways for the center to elevate student voices. And I want to thank all of you. And I think this is a perfect opportunity for us. We are going to have a chance to turn to what some of our voice awardees are doing in the UC community, which is another way that the center tries to create opportunities for civic engagement across the UC system. We're just going to highlight a couple of those, and then we'll be back for our incredible final panel of the conference. The Valuing Open and Inclusive Conversation and Engagement Initiative, otherwise known as VOICE, was created to encourage and support research, programs, and activities that further the mission of the UC National Center for Free Speech and Civic Engagement. The program is open to UC students, staff, and faculty and provides up to $5,000 in funding. Our second VOICE class centered their work on breaking barriers in campus expression and engagement. Programs identify barriers, steps that can be taken to address those barriers, and how those steps help to build community. Our VOICE recipients are doing outstanding and meaningful work in a wide variety of formats, including podcasts, sustained dialogue, webzines, courses, and book groups. Let's highlight a few of their projects.
We have these dialogue series that addresses all throughout the spectrum around equity, diversity, and access, free expression, and so forth. And prior to that, we also got the grant for UC Merced to have their first Free Speech Week. Part of that initiative was really to ground ourselves in terms of community and connection. And so what Dialogues That Matter provided was this space to talk about what's happening in our community and that's impacting it. Because the campus was experiencing anti-Semitism rhetoric, we invited content experts from Berkeley to discuss anti-Semitism. And then the other one that we were really looking at was around anti-Blackness.
The change that we hoped that it could affect was to give folks an opportunity to have conversations on topics that tend to be difficult, that folks don't know exactly how to navigate, and not only educate them on the matter, but also provide this presentation in a workshop-like setting that can actually give tools for folks on our campus to use once they have to continue navigating these conversations outside of the event. What we found is a really deep desire from people of all backgrounds to have conversations on topics that they've either typically avoided or have never had to have because of, either their social identity or social location.
We decided to create this class and we named it the Civic Engagement Scholars Program. The class is a 3-quarter class And the first quarter, we worked more on the academic aspects of civic engagement. We used the book by Erwin Chemerinsky and Howard Gilman about free speech on college campuses.
We also presented, Viviana, Maeve, and myself, on different issues. I did the leadership challenge, where they got to practice leadership skills to incorporate into the projects that they chose to do. We even had Michelle Deutschman come in and do a whole overview on the history of free speech. That, combined with our guest speakers, which included Chemerinsky, the dean of the law school at UC Berkeley, helped ground them, create that firm foundation, and really set them up to move forward on the projects that they are working on for winter and spring quarter.
This project is really about students and the voices that often get silenced in spaces. So it aims to basically illuminate students of color lived experiences and center their counter narratives to the master narratives, and uniquely identify areas of development for teachers and schools and universities. And so I worked with a focus group and we met, and it was really just kind of, what are your lived experiences? And they were able to highlight that not only in the focus group, but at the end, they were able to create works of art. Some of them painted, some of them wrote poetry, some of them created animations. And it was so important because it was their voices captured in something so poetic that when others saw it, they could really feel how they experience learning environments and classroom spaces. And I think that is deeply impactful. On top of a voice, an image does something that really moves you to change. It's important because it really reveals educational, social, and the racial inequities that are deeply embedded within our system, and subsequently our courses, our practice, and our classrooms.
If you're a staff member, faculty member, student, and you have an idea, applying to the Voice Grant would really provide you with an opportunity to actually implement that idea. And so I would encourage folks on the UC campuses to really utilize this resource.
When you get that grant, it provided connection with other folks who believe in this work. It provided networking opportunities and opportunities to meet others, right? I think it's a gift that the way the center provides these opportunities for past recipients, current recipients, right, to come together through these monthly gatherings. I think it's critical.
To learn what all of our voice recipients are doing and explore more about the center, please visit us at freespeechcenter.universityofcalifornia.edu. All right, we're back. And you know, what the voice awardees and what the students we just heard from are doing is incredible, but opportunities for civic engagement begin long before college. And I think sometimes we forget that. Too frequently, we bifurcate the conversation about democratic learning and participation in K through 12 from the conversation about it in higher education, when really they are part of the same continuum. To talk about the innovations in civics that are occurring in primary and secondary education and how best to prepare university students to embrace their role in our democracy, we have a fabulous group of women. Rachel Bellin is co-founder and managing partner of the Kentucky Student Voice Team, an independent youth-led organization comprising young people who work as education, research, policy, advocacy partners to co-create more just, democratic Kentucky schools and communities. She has decades of experience as, by turns, a high school teacher, youth development director, media literary educator, legislative aide, and radio news director in multiple states. Pragya Upreti serves as the research lead for the Kentucky Student Voice Team's Race, Ethnicity, and School Climate Study. In this capacity, she supported 24 other high school researchers to analyze data they collected from over 10,000 students from across the state who completed a survey they designed to help inform public conversation about the teaching of race in school. Pragya has also served as a qualitative researcher on the team's 2020 statewide Coping with COVID-19 study, organized one of Kentucky's first student-led town halls for school board candidates during the November 2020 election, and worked on several of KSVT's legislative initiatives. In addition to opinion pieces published in Kentucky newspapers, she's written for the National Association of State Boards of Education and co-authored a publication with the Aspen Institute. She's a senior at Lafayette High School in Lexington, Kentucky. And finally, Kei Kawashima Ginsburg is the new House Director of Center for Information and Research on Civic Learning and Engagement, otherwise known as CIRCLE, at Jonathan M. Tisch College of Civic Life at Tufts University. CIRCLE is a nonpartisan national research institute that focuses on youth, civic, political learning, and engagement. CIRCLE uses its expansive portfolio of research initiatives, tools for practitioner organizations, educators, and other civic stakeholders, and reports to advance equity-centered policy and practice in the civic sector. I'm so pleased to have all three of you here with us today. And what I would like to do, just to kind of get our audience even further engaged, is to start by doing a poll with everyone. If you could just take a minute, and what you're going to see up on the screen are going to be two different questions. One question is going to ask you to think. For some people, it's going to be thinking back just a couple of years. For others of you, you're going to have to think way, way, way back to high school like me. The first question is, when you were in high school, how seriously did people in positions of power take your opinions and ideas? And you can choose not seriously at all, neutral, not sure, somewhat seriously, or very seriously. And then the second question is, when you think about how you built your knowledge and experience as civic participants, what would you say in your childhood and youth were the most salient civic learning and political education? Where would you say your most salient civic learning and political education took place? And there's a number of different answers: at school, at classes, at school through extracurricular activities, at home, in the community through organizations and movements. You're not sure. I didn't get much civic and political learning. So I want to give folks a couple minutes to please fill that out. And then what we will do is, after our panelists have a chance to introduce themselves, we will come back to them. So while everybody is voting, I really want to be able to hear a little bit about what drew all three of you to this incredible work that you're doing. And why don't we go ahead and start with Rachel. And can you tell us what led you to co-found the Kentucky Student Voice team with high school students, and what were you hoping, or what are you hoping to achieve through this work?
So thank you for the question. I love following Tiffany, Aiden, and Muncie on this because it feels so aligned. And at the risk of sounding overblown, pretty much my whole life led me to support this work, the Kentucky Student Voice team, which can be distilled to a vision of civic life in which young people play a meaningful role. In some ways, it's a rebellion against what I always felt was an underestimation of the capacity of young people to contribute to civic life. And it's also an affirmation of what's possible when we support young people to co-design our communities, really our democracy, with us. On a personal note, my father is a former civil rights attorney who helped form the first integrated law firm in Birmingham in the 60s, and who was himself drawn to the effort as a Jew growing up in the shadow of the Holocaust. Through him and his stories of youth activism and heroism, really, I was steeped in an early understanding of, as President Daniels alluded to in his opening remarks, the fragility of democracy, and also the need to be a full participant in it. As a former youth myself, I found an outlet for my admittedly unusual interests as a reporter for Children's Express. This was a nationally syndicated news service that had young people like me in bureaus around the country investigating issues of injustice for a broad intergenerational audience. The work had us interviewing young people from the margins, dropouts, runaways, those who were incarcerated, and powerful adults, including former US presidents, survivors of genocide, and social workers. With my team, I then reported on what I learned for real-world news media outlets. So the experience of feeling like I could contribute to important conversations, even at such a young age, was so formative that I've pretty much spent my entire adult life trying to recreate that experience for others. The Kentucky Student Voice team represents the 9th iteration of a model I've been playing with and developing with young people over the last 3 decades to unleash youth capacity in the civic square. The group comprises about 100 self-selected Kentucky students, as you said, and our mission is to co-create more just and democratic schools and communities as education research policy and advocacy partners. This is a fully independent, youth-led, adult-supported organization that is young people conducting participatory action, education research around everything from school climate and mental health issues to inequities in the college transition process, racism, and other and other issues. And this is a group that uses student stories and statistics. They methodically gather to advocate for education justice at the district and state levels. And these are students who draw on both their lived experience and expert knowledge to shape and inform public narratives and ensure that fewer education decisions are made about young people without young people.
That was really beautiful. And that's why I love to ask people kind of what brought them this far on their journey, because the answers are really moving. And you know what, Pragya, I'd like to turn to you next and have you share with us what drew you to Kentucky Student Voice Team, and maybe share with us before you connected with the team, what types of opportunities were available to you and your peers to participate in civic life.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on here as well. Super excited for our conversation moving forward. And I guess I just want to start off by saying too, like, I got involved with the Kentucky Student Voice Team because I really wasn't presented with a lot of critical opportunities for me and other young people that I was surrounded with that really felt passionate about improving our education system, largely because we've spent so much time seeing its fragility, especially at a time like right now. There really weren't any meaningful opportunities for us to be authentically engaged into informing critical policy changes. So that's really where I felt so drawn to the work of the Kentucky Student Voice Team. And particularly because it's a very interesting balance of how we look at intergenerational partnerships within our work. We recognize, at the core that experience is expertise. And even though a lot of us are, 16, 17, and 18-year-olds that don't have degrees in any sort of field, we do have years of experience of sitting through classrooms where things maybe didn't feel just. We've had a lot of experience on that front. And I think a lot of the work that we do moving forward really is informed by our experiences in the past as well. But one of the biggest reasons why I got involved with this work and just justice organizing broadly was the same reason why a lot of other young folks get involved in the first place. It feels like it's a collective frustration for the way things are presently, and the way that we've looked at what we considered was normalcy and how we continue to proceed at a time like right now, when we've seen the sheer fragility of our education system, but also several other systems within it that really, our work really speaks truth to power too. So as we kind of get into the core of the work that we do in general as a youth-led organization, as an authentically youth-led organization where young people really do have that power to co-create and be able to present meaningful policy changes and use the research that we spent months digging into to be able to present it on platforms like this and be able to really engage with the folks that are typically, disconnected with the realities of people on the ground and people that are at the forefront of these experiences. I just think it's really meaningful for all of us to be able to do that. And that's kind of my background of how I got involved with this work in general. I think it's, I'm more grateful for it every day, the more that we get to do this work.
Thank you. That was so beautifully said. And definitely last but not least, I want to ask Kay, because your background is in community psychology and social emotional learning. And so I'd love to know your trajectory of going from that to research on youth civic participation.
Great. Thank you for having me. And hi, everyone. I'm actually going to take even one more step back since I'm at an institution of education. So I grew up in Japan hating school. I didn't like to study. I really, really didn't like how the class were set up and how many classes I had to take. And I had to take like 15 different exams each semester. Everything about me really didn't like that. It was really limiting. And I always kind of dreamt of coming to America so that I can be free. And so when I finally got to the United States to study at college, at Knox College, which is a small liberal arts college, I didn't have a lot of money. So I took a job in the community working for nursing homes. And that's when I started to meet a lot of people who are chronically ill. And that made me want to really talk about prevention of mental illness, which then led me to eventually apply for a graduate program that focused on some concepts like positive youth development or prevention of mental illness, which included study of understanding how young people relate to systems, people, and other kind of internal factors to be well or not well and have different life trajectory. toward the end of my graduate programs, I was doing a lot of clinical work, right? As you are trying to become a clinical psychologist, I was practicing to be one. And my specialty was youth and family. And I worked in inner city Chicago in a community-based clinic. And the clients, who were mostly teenagers, whom I met through things like court-ordered therapy and group work, were a lot of young people who were wonderful, but completely oppressed by the systems that surrounded them. They grew up a lot of times in subsidized housing. Some of them had been homeless. Some of them had been parents, very, very young age, and with no support from the rest of the family. And I felt like we could be treating these young person one at a time, but they're not actually the problem. It's really the systems that always surrounded them. And so I wanted to start to work on the research and policy that changes the systems using the power of social science rather than sort of doing either working on the symptoms of these problems or just simply studying and watching these problems by just doing research like I would have in an academia if I had sought out a faculty position. That's typically what you would need to do. So when opportunity arose at Circle, which was a center that I didn't know too much about, but I knew a little bit about. And civic engagement happens to be one of those positive youth development outcomes. So that's how I connected to what I knew to Circle. And once I got here to interview, I realized that Circle was one of those special places that really committed to sharing what they were studying and tried to really do that in the most accessible and open way. So I really fell in love with that model. And I sort of evolved with Circle while I was extending kind of knowledge about voting, national service, youth movement as the world of civic engagement by young people shifted. And I've been here for well over 10 years now, just because I keep learning everything new, including from young people. So that's where I am.
That's wonderful. We should all continue to learn every day, both from young people and from each other. Before we kind of jump a little bit deeper into the research, I think maybe we can just take a minute. Let's take a look at our poll results. Okay. So let's see. Only 3% of people felt like their ideas were taken very seriously. 27% said somewhat seriously, 19% not sure, and by far the majority not seriously at all. Okay. And then thinking about how people built their knowledge, what were the most salient, where did they have the most salient experiences? Interesting, pretty evenly divided, right? We see 17 school through extra, so it's classes and extracurriculars, at home, community, didn't get much opportunity. So really pretty even. All right, so we'll keep that in mind as we go through our conversation. And I think the next question I want to ask, sort of piggybacking on that, is, in an ideal world, what does doing civics right look like? And sort of maybe what are we doing well now and what do we need to do better? And I'd love for each of you to speak to that. Do you want to start, Pragya?
Yes, absolutely. I think this is a really interesting question for more reasons than just the fact that this is multifaceted. There's several different angles with which you can target a question like this. And I think, doing civic education and civic learning looks very different in very different contexts. And even just going back to this poll, for me, a lot of my most meaningful civic learning came from out of the classroom. I took AP government my freshman year of high school and was, so grateful for how much I learned in that class about all this high level policy making, but very rarely did I feel mobilized by any of that. I rarely took in any of that information and felt like I needed to go out in the community and do something. And I think that's something that a lot of young people can relate to. There's that mobilization aspect of our education system is too often missing, even from students and from students who take classes, as high of a level as AP or advanced or whatever that might be. But one thing that I think about a lot is that I think civic learning is often, looked at as this super high level idea and framework where it takes a lot more, it takes a curriculum and this and that to put together. But very rarely do we sit and think about how, civic education and civic learning can really just be bringing folks together in conversation with one another and just talking about issues that are too often distant from our schools. a lot of times right now, that idea in and of itself is just hyper politicized, and we're not even able to say things like that without garnering, a debate. But I think it really does take something like that and that pushback to really be able to see how meaningful it is to just sit and have a roundtable discussion, especially with young people who, while we often say are leaders of the future, are also very much leaders of the present. The work that we do in and outside of the classroom speak to that. And I just think to like the work of our own team, the Kentucky Student Voice team in general, the students that are a part of our team who do this work on the daily, we feel so much pushback in the movement space, especially right now, since we're taking up an issue like race, but we continue this work even then because we feel its value in affirming more just and democratic public schools where students really have the opportunity to be faced with challenging concepts and eye-opening discussions. And that's really where we get to a point where our schools are viewed as engines and incubators of our democracy. And I think that's, in my eyes, as a young person that's also been involved with a lot of other out-of-school activities that deal with civic learning, I think that's where the most meaningful aspects of it come from, not necessarily from the textbooks that are often very outdated and very disconnected from the realities of our present community.
Thank you. Well, I don't know what this means. I'm sure that we are far apart in age, but my AP government experience was very similar for what it's worth. Okay. Do you want to go ahead, Kay?
Sure. I really resonate with Pragya, what you said about sort of how it can be really about people connecting with each other and dialoguing each other, because I always believe in the kind of value of classrooms starting from the first day of preschool or kindergarten as a mini polity, where people are navigating relationships, sometimes navigating different layers of rules and power and authority. And research continues to show that even 3-year-olds actually understand some basic concepts of citizenship. So there's lots of playground studies, for example, just trying to watch young people that are, 3, 4-year-old, trying to figure out how to negotiate this shared space of playground. How do we figure out how we are like using these resources, like a bug that you can catch on the playground, and then negotiating over that and making decisions about how we should live together. And that's the basic question of civic learning and civic life. So my ideal way of doing civics would be that students have this opportunity to really negotiate, deliberate, make decisions, feel empowered, and feel heard over this big question of how should we live together? What should we do? Over many different classes over time with different levels of complexity, context, and content. I do believe in teaching the content of civics, like in AP government, but ideally you should be able to do that even when you're taking a math class. And what I mean by that is really trying to figure out the math concepts in the context of a community or in the context of a policy that even young students are facing, and especially as you get older. And that's really how we prepare people for civic life. And I think I will just add one more thing about the importance of inclusion and sort of how we think about engagement of students in relation to motivation. So we have often dismissed students who don't look motivated and who are not engaged in the classroom activity as just unmotivated as a person that's not motivated. But the latest scientists, continue to show that it's really, really about how students are able to see themselves in the content we're talking about. So let's talk about diverse historical narratives, for example, or how they're able to connect whatever they're learning to the context of their own communities and their lives. And then importantly, whenever they are taking in information, they needed an opportunity to mediate and process and then reflect on that content. That's how we keep finding the students actually do learn and retain the content and concepts, and therefore be able to actually behave and act as civic actors moving forward. So I think we really need to think about not just sort of relaying the content, but also how are we relaying the content, and then how are we thinking about inclusion of all types of students that are in the classroom and in the community.
I love that, all types of students and all types of learners. Rachel, I imagine you have something you might want to add.
So Pragya and Kay laid it out beautifully, but I would just add that I would underscore that students don't magically become civically engaged, thoughtful citizens when they turn 18 and are eligible to vote. So we really need to lean into the opportunities well before they are eligible to vote. So that's at the high school, middle school, elementary school level, as Kay was pointing out. And I think to your question, to do civics education right at the school level, we need to value students as citizens of school communities, and we need to normalize students in spaces where they're not normally welcome, and we need to invite them in. So we should see them at decision-making tables with older people where decisions about them are made in education. So that means, among other things, we should support them to be participants in school board meetings, not just performers, as most school board meetings have students performing and not participating. They should be on superintendent screening committees. They should be in school-based decision-making bodies. And at the classroom level, we should be inviting students into the feedback loop to provide feedback on what's working and what's not with their own learning. Let's build that agency muscle that is required for a good citizen in a healthy democracy. And let's normalize their presence in intergenerational, cross-generational, co-generational spaces. And love that Pragya being on this panel as a co-equal makes perfect sense for every reason. And she's modeling it, what it can look like. It feels totally seamless and right. So you can't do democracy well if you don't see it in action. And there's so many opportunities within a school system. At the same time, I would also say that's what adults can be working on, creating those spaces. And young people, we need to support young people to get over some learned helplessness and to be able to make their way into those spaces too, and to know that they belong there. That we're fighting against a lot to convince young people of that too, because they have been socialized to believe they don't belong, and they do.
Absolutely. And what you're talking about, all of you, is very layered, and it kind of goes back initially to what Kay was saying, which is this is about systematic change, right? We're talking about change at a lot of different levels, and we have to pull a bunch of different levers in order to effectuate it. So I think what I want to do now, before I ask even more questions, is I want Pragya to give us maybe an overview or a highlight of the Race to Learn study, sort of the highlights of the data, and really like, what are you going to be doing next with the data in terms of navigating, democracy and safeguarding it. And I think we actually, I hope you're not going to be surprised. We have a couple of pictures of you in action, which we're just going to show really fast while you maybe start to talk to us about how you tackled this huge project. Oh, sorry. Someone in the question and answer also asked me, how many young people today are members of KSVT? And so maybe one of you can answer that question or say it out loud. Okay, go ahead, Pragya.
Awesome. Yeah. And I will just quickly say that at any given time, we usually have around 100 or so young folks, typically middle to high school, that are on our team, and, different research projects. And because we have research, advocacy, and policy going on at the same time, and a podcast and a forum and all the things, there's usually just handfuls of students working on every facet of our work. So it looks like a lot at any given time, but a lot of our work over the past couple months has looked like talking about race in schools. So, I will just add, based off of what Rachel had said earlier, too young to vote doesn't mean too young to have a voice. And we really underscored that truth by putting together a study, what we called the Race to Learn study. So it was an entirely student-driven initiative, of course, adult supported by incredible people like Rachel, that we launched in the middle of heated local and national conversations about whether and how to discuss issues related to race in schools. And the goal was essentially just to capture the real-time experiences of Kentucky youth to better inform public discourse around this subject. And, along with that, to ensure that it's more student-centered. So the study basically, it shared results from our race, ethnicity, and school climate student-to-student survey, what we called rescue. And it was kind of inspired by our previous work of, state and school level school climate research, including what we did in the midst of COVID when schools had initially shut down, what was called Coping with COVID. And that's, where we analyze the social, emotional, and learning impacts of that remote learning had on young folks across our state. So we adapted a lot of that to kind of frame the current conversation surrounding race. And The entire research process was refined by young folks and adults beyond and within our team, who really provided us with extensive feedback ahead of its dissemination. So the survey window, just for folks to know, was open for 2 weeks, and within that time frame, we got nearly 11,000 student respondents to share their experiences and their narratives dealing with race and their experiences of talking about race in school and outside of school, from almost all 120 Kentucky counties. And we really, throughout this process, relied on an extensive network of young folks, of families and teachers and administrators, community members, to target individuals and students who were underrepresented in the responses after the first few days of dissemination. So our results share a lot. You know, they mirror the racial, ethnic, and geographic diversity of our state. But two, they also focus on what we distilled into 6 broad themes that were derived from our quantitative results. And within those, we pulled several student quotes and student voices in general from our open response questions that we analyzed and distilled back through our incredible research team. So it was a lot, a lot of this work. We were like at a rush timeline because we were working in tandem with the legislative session because of, once again, the timeliness of this entire issue. But, I will just say before I kind of give an overview of what specific findings we'd come up with, we specifically chose to research this issue for 3 main reasons. And I think I say there's 3 because there's several different reasons why. One, a lot of folks on our own research team were drawn to this work in particular, but also just our team in general. So one was, of course, the timeliness of this issue. Race isn't a new issue. This has been, in conversation for a very long time. But the subject of race has been happening on it's been a national conversation on a really local stage. So when bills that threatened the integrity of our public schools and, the prospect of even talking about issues like race within our schools were introduced in Kentucky, that's kind of when we got the ball rolling on our movement and organizing around that. So that was one of the biggest reasons why. But the other one was also just to think about how, as we're doing this work, we're often balancing this battle between tokenization, where young folks doing critical work like this is often like a checking off the box of, we have a young person doing something like this, and that's that. It's more of like the optic side of things versus the actionable importance of having young people doing this insane work almost. But balancing that tokenization with the meaningfulness and the authenticity with which we did this work, and collaborated with adults and other young folks nationwide to be able to pull through. And I will say that the last reason is one of the main reasons why I even joined the team in general. It was just this collective frustration with the way things were going, even, as a student, to see bills that threatened the integrity of our schools by even just saying that, we're not allowed to talk about race in schools, but at the same time, like, were we ever talking about race in schools? Because I'm a student and we never did in my classes. So I don't know where that really came from. So there's a lot to think about in terms of this work in particular, but the 6 themes that we kind of distilled through this entire process really just came down to thinking about the experiences that students had shared with us through their open responses. So we targeted racial and ethnic representation in the classroom, perceptions of equitable rule enforcement, racial and ethnic exclusion, teacher diversity, racial and ethnic conversations beyond the classroom. And then one of the most integral parts of this work that we really like to highlight as we put together intense research and shared out with the world is policy recommendations. So we recognize that an issue like race and talking about race in schools, as hyper politicized as it is, it's also an issue where we can have really localized forms of recommendations. So that could look like informing educators, how better to improve their school climates and environments within their classrooms, particularly as students of color in their schools are, grappling and dealing with real-time issues of race within and beyond the school itself. But at the same time, we can provide recommendations for policymakers and other higher level, education policy folks that are in that space as well. So that was a mouthful, and I realize there's a lot within this research in particular, but I really do encourage anyone that's interested in digging a little deeper into what we found within this work, and even just revelations from our own research team, which are included at the end of our Race to Learn report, which you can find on our website. I really just encourage folks to be able to read that and take a little bit of time to see the importance of young folks across Kentucky that are doing this work that's so necessary at this moment.
Thank you. And just so you know, we will be attaching that report and a lot of other resources about your work and about Circle to this recording that will live on our website and be pushed out. It's even hard to have a follow-up because what you're talking about is such an incredible undertaking. I don't know, Rachel or Kay, if you want to add any specifics about this particular study. And then of course, I want to also get to the question of this is the real work and why aren't we seeing more of it, which I think is really one of the fundamental questions.
I would just add to what Pragya laid out perfectly. Pragya is doing democracy. Pragya and her team are doing democracy. They're not waiting for permission to do this work. They're not waiting for classroom sanction. They're not waiting for an administration to organize this. They're taking it upon themselves to do this work. And that's part of the magic. In all this, the process is a huge part of the product here. When we're having conversations in Kentucky, as Pragya said, about the history and legacy of racism and whether and how classrooms should address it, by doing this work, they're addressing it. So they're not waiting for those decisions to be made legislatively. This can happen in tandem with what's going on in the legislature. And it's a way to model other possibilities of what this work can look like. I will also underscore that this is hyper collaborative work. 26 youth researchers worked on this with adult supports. We have a research advisory dream team with people from the University of Kentucky and other research institutions that serve supporting roles and offer guidance when needed. We consult other youth outside of the team and adults outside of the team on our survey tools. We really invite the community in to own this work with us. And so that is another huge piece of this. It's a very pluralistic process to put this together, and that's really important to us. This work is work that is so educational in nature, right? It's taking the highest level of critical thinking. Everything we want a high school student to be able to do, they're doing. They don't get a grade. It doesn't fit very nicely on the Common App. There's no space for it to describe it, but we know it's valuable because it stands up in the real world as having an impact.
I just want to quickly say, as a member of the scholarly community studying civic engagement, people really miss out on the opportunity to actually learn from the work done by young people and the impact they make. I think I go and speak with Kentucky Student Voice Team colleagues that are doing really important work in the same sector I work in, which is the democracy sector and the civic education sector. Their work is really innovative and really important, and our work is rigorous, but I couldn't dream of doing a student survey that includes more than 10,000 students. It's just not possible for us, right? So they have really different and unique and valuable assets they bring to the work. The lens that they bring is different, but very, very valuable. And sometimes I think we get sort of tricked by sort of credentials, like, did you finish college? Did you finish high school? Do you have a PhD? And so on, and without really looking at the work the people produce. So we're really lucky to be able to sort of get over that and actually benefit from the work the Kentucky Student Voice and others are able to do. And I really hope other scholars who are trying to understand civic engagement, especially of young people, actually go listen, read their report, and then ask for advice if they can have time. And I benefit from that a lot. So thank you, team. And I hope people do the same.
I hope so too. And I'm going to just interject with a question from the queue that is saying, I want to establish a program like this in rural California. And I'm curious if Kentucky Student Voice is thinking about replicating this model in other states. And I'm hoping the answer is yes.
I'll take that one. So we don't have Napoleonic plans to take over the country, but we are very open source by design. We try to be very non-proprietary, and we really support other people across the country who are wanting to do this. So you can hit us up contact us through the website. And we're very happy to talk with people about our work and hopefully provide you resources, but also some inspiration that you can do it too. So thank you for the question.
One of the things I'm really struck by is the kind of the theme of the collective, both Pragya's discussion of sort of her drive by collective frustration, but then also that the work is so pluralistic and is such a collective. And just again, this lens that we look at oftentimes is what the individual needs to accomplish, especially in, I think, scholarly and educational institutions, right? What are your grades? What are the letters after your name? And how do we continue to refocus on this idea of building community? And I don't know if any of you have any additional thoughts, not just in the world of civics, but I think in the world of just community building as you're thinking of speaking to people who are largely from the higher education environment, which is a different kind of community that takes a lot of also, building and scaffolding.
I really quickly just want to jump in here because I think that, I love that question because a lot of times I think about like the work in and of itself and how sometimes it can just be really exhausting to sit here and like feel like you're often just having to prove yourself, 10 times over, 100 times over when, there's people that are in these spaces of almost just apathy and not knowing the value of seeing young folks do critical work like this. But part of what makes this work so meaningful within just the Kentucky Student Voice team, but also just the movement space, nationally, I think it's really interesting to think about how, the work that we do within the Kentucky Student Voice team, even for instance, rests entirely on the capacity of young people. We are all students and I'm not going to lie, like we usually don't have a plan for what's happening in the next 2 weeks. And that's okay. We understand like our mission and the mission behind the movement. And even as we were working on Race to Learn, we often like have to readjust to the ebbs and flows of availability. A lot of times that looks like, for me, it's looked like balancing like a lacrosse game with having several different meetings to attend to. And it can just be asynchronous work as well. So, I say that because there's a lot of value in naming the fact that like capacity is such an integral part and a part of this work that we really respect within our group in particular. And for folks that are looking to replicate this work in general, of course, like Rachel had said, we're so open to being able to discuss like how we make this work, what the like magic behind this whole movement is. And in my opinion, it's really just acknowledging and having grace through this whole process of saving the world, really. There's a lot within that rests directly on the capacity of young folks. And if for whatever reason, it's finals week and a lot of us don't have the capacity or bandwidth to be able to work on a massive project, then we're going to take that week off and pick it up, whenever things feel like they're ready to keep going. But I just, I think there's just a lot of value in naming that, because for people that are, starting to look into this space a little deeper and really affirming the value of young people and student voices broadly, it's really important to be able to learn that, especially, it's been one of the biggest things that I've learned in this context of working in intergenerational spaces where we all just have shifting capacities, and it's informed a lot of our work moving forward.
Can I just add, sorry. Can I just add one thing? And it's building also on what Kay said. Kay, I so appreciated how you talked about, because it's very authentic, how you see members of our team and other youth as really as colleagues, which they are. But when we're talking about higher ed, it's the same as lower ed, if that's the other word for it. We should stop seeing young people as practicing for the real world. They live in the real world, they breathe in the real world. We need them. My God, we need them right now, right? As partners to improve our communities and our democracy at large. We need them. We cannot wait. As Pragya said, they are so much more than just the future. And that applies to undergrads, of course, too, traditional and non-traditional.
No, what I was just going to add was just to say to Pragya, I'm really so happy that you named that. And it was also something that I really noticed in our last panel, which is just naming things that I think, unfortunately, in my lifetime, I think I was I'm very authentic, but I had to really grow into that sort of in adulthood. I was sort of that you're not supposed to name those things about capacity and about balancing and about the stresses of it and the reality that like, you don't just get to some magic end product without a lot of, kind of rough and tumble. And I think it's important to, to name that. And I'm really glad that you did, because I think that's really important for everyone. Kay, there's a question for you. We're almost out of time, which devastates me, but it says, based on your work, what states are showing strong youth civic momentum, or perhaps the opposite? Where is the greatest need to mobilize?
So I would start by saying there's much greater within state differences than between states differences. Of course, there are places like, for example, we do produce a thing called Youth Electoral Significant Index, which is really supposed to highlight how much young people can pivot election outcomes and election impact and how much they can get mobilized. But really, the point is really more about addressing the inter-community differences or within school differences and how people are feeling empowered and feeling like they have a stake in civic life. So election is only sort of starting point that I just mentioned, but it's really important to look broadly about both the strengths that different communities present and as well as the growth needs. So when you talk about civic engagement, I'm thinking about movement, I'm thinking about national service, I'm thinking about community service as well as voting. And honestly, when I look at the difference by states, even in those different metrics, they kind of vary. Different states rank higher than others, depending on what you look at. And then when I sort of open it up one more to see how the counties are different, for example, in Kentucky, I think you guys can tell me this more than anybody else, they're vastly different in terms of what kind of context that they're operating in, what's okay to say, what's not okay to say, and what is kind of promoted at their school as opposed to others, right? So we really need to kind of understand the macro picture, and then sure, we have those information, but it's always important to also pay attention to what's happening at that micro level, all the way down to classroom, if you ask me.
All right, I'm looking at the time and I'm thinking what I want to do is just give each of you an opportunity to kind of comment on anything about our panel, or really about scaffolding democracy generally, as we're coming to sort of the end of this 2 days, so I'll let you decide who wants to go first, or I'll call on you.
I can try to take this just to put a really fine point on a lot of points that were made. We really need to rethink how we're doing, how we're scaffolding, as you say, K-12 to support people to be civically engaged and thoughtful citizens. In our own work in Kentucky, the ironies abound that underscore this need in our work. One of my favorite examples from a few years ago, I had a student who had drafted and was advocating for a bill to add students to superintendent screening committees. She was holding press conferences, testifying with other students, writing opinion pieces that was published in newspapers across the state. I was driving her back from a rally in Frankfurt, and she looked a little down, and I asked her what was wrong, and she had been looking at her grades on her phone, and she told me that she got a B in a subject, and she hadn't gotten a B before. And I'm like, seriously? So what subject was it in? AP government was her answer. So it just shows you like there's such a disconnect and a lack of recognition for what's valuable if it's not happening within the school and the classroom walls. We've got to transcend those barriers. Students are part of the world. They live in the world. We need to value what they do beyond the classroom walls as we do within them. Same thing, by the way, for things like, we do a lot of mock things, mock debate, debating public policy issues. We need those people outside of mock debate, beyond that. Get your trophy, but now join us in the public square and use those skills for good and for humanity. I just think there's a lot more connections we can make.
Thank you. Pragya?
Yeah, so I think the majority of what, is at the crux of this conversation has already been said. So without, repeating too much of what's already been said, I will just say that we really just need to sit and think about how our public schools are engines of our democracy at the forefront. The more that we limit our nation's young folks from having uncomfortable conversations, discomfort or not, in our schools, we cannot possibly hold on to the hope of creating a progressive and prosperous and prepared populace. There's so much value in sitting and thinking about that in not just a futuristic light, but very much in the present. There's exactly what Rachel said. It's important to recognize that, like, once again, too young to vote doesn't mean too young to have a voice. And that's exactly what we're, consistently fighting against every single day within the Kentucky Student Voice team, is just fighting that uphill battle of fighting tokenization, but also at the same time being able to affirm the value of having folks like us going and testifying and going and writing op-eds and using all of those as methods for us to continue the narrative and shift the needle, in a sense, of the importance of having young people doing this type of work. So there isn't much more to add to that. I think there's just a lot of value in even having spaces like these where we can be in intergenerational context and have such a fruitful discussion about what the future of civic education looks like and should look like in this country. And a lot of our work in general should be able to inform that as well.
Well, I'm looking forward to having more of these discussions. Okay, Kay, you have the final quick word before I wrap us up.
Thanks. Since we're at a higher ed conference, I'd like to say the importance of really supporting the educator side. So the faculty, administrators, the staff people that are working at an institution. I say this in K-12 too. It's not just the political science department's job, and it's not just students affairs job to think about how are we supporting civic engagement and student voice as the entire institution. And really think about what is my job as a staff member or as a member of a humanities or a member of an arts class and statistics and engineers, right? It's really important to really think about how the students' lives are embedded in their academics, as well as the context they live in, whether it's political or civic engagement activities they're interested in or topics they care about, say climate. And sometimes we think this is a higher education, higher learning, so we have nothing to do with whatever's going around our academic studies, but I don't think students think that way anymore. It's a very highly interconnected world that they were born into, that they thrive in, and sort of separating their lives to what they're learning as a content and subject is only a disservice to actual learning and advancement of our communities. So thanks.
Listen, I want to thank the three of you for sharing your valuable time with us and your wisdom and your expertise. And we're going to close. I mean, this is just a perfect way to end what I think has been a really interesting and dynamic conference. I wanted to bookend the conference. I started with thank yous. I want to end with thank yous. These 2 days are the result of a lot of hard work on the part of numerous people, and I want to reiterate my gratitude to them. Thank you first and foremost to the incredible Brenda Pitcher, the center's executive assistant, to the immensely talented Glen Echo Group. I want to recognize again my colleagues in the Chancellor Suite at UCI, at the Office of the President for UC, all of whom are key to the center's success. I want to thank members of the center's academic and national advisory boards for their ongoing support. I'd like to ask you to consider supporting the work of the center. All of our resources, all of our research, and all of our conferences are available at no cost so that we can increase accessibility. If you'd like to make a donation, big or small, you can find a place to do that at freespeechcenter.universityofcalifornia.edu. I look forward to continuing to partner with each of you as together we continue the essential work of safeguarding our democracy. Thanks so much and see you soon.